Hey everybody, how are you? We're doing a second round of 50 ways to mess up your startup. I'm doing 8 through 18 today, so this is just color. You can read them obviously in the on the blog post, but I just want to give you some additional ideas around them. So one thing I want to address is people who are doing a university spin out. Now this actually does apply to anyone who is a technical co-founder, and that is, don't think that you can be everything. Plenty of technical founders think, oh, well, I invented it, so I'm the CEO and I'm the CTO. Guess what? You need a lot of skills and you need help. So no one can do everything. So be sure and get a co-founder and don't make that mistake of thinking, oh, I'm doing it all. So one thing that is really an issue when you're starting out, you don't have a lot of money, you're just kind of scrambling, but you still have to protect your intellectual property, because intellectual property is the heart of your business. Now that can be patents, but plenty of businesses like software don't have really meaningful patent infrastructure. I mean, you can try, but it's quite difficult. And there's other industries where it doesn't make any sense, but you need to have copyright, you need to have trademark, and eventually register those trademarks. You need to have trade secrets in some cases. So all kinds of IP you need to at least be thinking about and using the proper markings, and using the proper protection for your intellectual property from day one. So one of the issues around IP is if you have someone who is a contractor, they have to sign an agreement that says it is work for hire, meaning you own their work product. And I actually worked for a company, it was a technology company, and they had hired a team, it was a little small company, to write them an application. And this company had negotiated that they own the rights to it and that we only got a licensed copy. So they turned around and sold it to our competitors. I was not there when that deal was negotiated. I could not believe it, but it's true. And so, of course, that's devastating in the marketplace. So work for hire. That's true if it's art, if it's a logo. I had an intern who was a graphic artist. He didn't do a lot of real graphic work. He did some web work for us. This was what we were wanting. But I still had him do a work for hire agreement, even though he was in high school. He was over 18. So work for hire agreements, super important. Don't, even if it's your friend, okay? One area where entrepreneurs do get in trouble is by calling people contractors who are actually employees. And the IRS gets very grumpy, and you, the employer, are on the hook for this. Okay, even Microsoft has gone in trouble for this. If they're working regular hours in your office and get paid, and they have to be there 40 hours a week, and you provide the computer and all these different things, and this is not legal advice, right? But there's a whole set of characteristics of an employee. A true contractor usually has other clients. They provide all their own infrastructure. Again, not legal advice. Go get legal advice. But that's the concept. There's a real distinct difference between how contractors and employees are managed. And the IRS really will come after you. And then you have to pay a whole bunch of taxes and a whole bunch of other stuff. It's not pretty. So be clear who real contractors are and who employees are, and pay them accordingly and pay the taxes accordingly from the beginning. Let's turn a little bit to how do you get good legal work done. Don't use a non-venture attorney. Okay, it's really important. If you're going to potentially raise money, and the truth is any company that grows very much will eventually raise money. This is something a lot of people, I hear entrepreneurs say, well, I'm bootstrapping or I'm crowdfunding or whatever. Eventually, if your business is fast growing, you will have to raise money somewhere. You will have to have growth capital to accelerate that growth. And now there are plenty of family-owned businesses that were bootstrapped and that continue to be family-owned and never raised money. But really, in today's market, that is something you at least have to have in the back of your mind, that it might come to pass. And we just had a company here in Utah. They bootstrapped for like a decade, and they got to big revenue dollars, but they wanted to go public. They needed to make some big investments before they did that. They raised a lot of money, over 100 million, I think, and then went public pretty recently. And so I think they thought that they would always self-fund, they were growing and paying for all their costs out of their growth, but when they needed to make that big ticket investment, they did in fact raise money. So use venture experienced attorneys, and they will know who they are, right? If they don't say, hey, we do VC stuff all the time, they're not venture experienced. Go somewhere else. If they say, well, we've never really done any of this, then, that's not the right attorney. It shouldn't be hard to find out who the right attorneys are. So use somebody who's experienced in these issues. Okay, so one thing too that's really important is to get high quality documents done when you create your company. Now, we create an LLC for our first company, and then when we took investor money, we did basically you decant the assets into a Delaware C corporation, and that's perfectly fine. But do make sure you get real documents, you get the operating agreement, you get all the stuff that you need to have if you're going to do an LLC, or likewise if you're going to do a C corp, make sure it's done right and it's done well. See the previous one, right? Okay, so 14th way to mess up your startup is to specify your pre-money valuation. And you see this a lot if people get a PPM. So if they go to a non-venture attorney, the non-venture attorney will say, well, we'll make a private placement memorandum for you, and then you can shop that around. Okay, that is the way some non-high growth businesses do it, but it's not the way high growth businesses do it. Instead, you're going to negotiate that pre-money valuation. And there are some rules of thumb. Typically, if there's people in your community who are, nonprofits or whatever, who are mentoring entrepreneurs, they might have some good ideas about what the pre-money looks like in your community. It's not the same in all markets. It varies. But if you remember, we talked about designing the perfect investor. Your perfect investor is not necessarily, or is really almost never, in your hometown. So that's part of the subtlety, is you've got to get a handle on what expected pre-money valuation is, where you're raising money, and with the kind of investor. But a sophisticated investor will kind of know what the going rate is. So number 15, I worked for a company one time, and they went public not long after I joined them, maybe a year or something. And there were a number of people on the team who had been promised by the founders that they would have equity, that they would get stock, but the founders never got around to giving it out in the early days. And so then by the time the company went public, they weren't allowed to give out private equity anymore. They had to give it out basically on the same terms that investors were going to buy it. So basically these employees who built this business for years and years and worked so hard didn't get any advantage of early stock, because the founders never did it. So the three founders got $500 million each, and the VP of R&D who'd grown that business got $5 million. And that was not fair or right. And that's because the founders didn't give equity, even though they promised it. So either don't promise it, okay, or do the paperwork, right? And if you believe and promise people, you need to follow through, and that means you need to do it in writing. So never say a word about equity unless you're willing to back it up with paper that grants those options. You have an option plan in place, and you put that in writing. Okay, so 16 is related to 15, which is have a stock option pool, right? Have a pool of options for employees, for partners, for advisors, and have a plan of how much certain roles get, and then just do it. That's important. It's actually important for investors. They will insist on a stock option pool to keep it from all being to the founders, and making sure that all the people who need to have an incentive to work hard have that incentive. Okay, so it's important to remember that entrepreneurship is really a team sport, and there's a little bit of this kind of goes back to the first couple I covered, thinking that you can do it all, and there's a little bit of the myth of the amazing founder, you all alone, but really very few founders have ever been successful by themselves, and not now, not in today's much more complex environment. You need a team, and that includes advisors and mentors and coaches. I'm going to tell you a little bit about one of our coaching clients. Had a great opportunity to speak. She felt that she had been just kind of a small business in a very large but not very tech savvy or very forward thinking industry, and she'd gotten asked to moderate a panel at a big thought leadership conference, and really leadership conference. So all the big players were going to be there, and she had a message. She wanted to try and attract these big companies to her vision, to partner with her and invest in her and all that. And so it was a pretty bold play for her. And so I helped her clarify her message, identify, what she needed to focus on. I helped her with her PowerPoint to just be super clear on those key points. And she texted me right after the presentation, her panel, and it had gone so well. And then the next day, people were looking at her profile on LinkedIn, and then someone did an article and said the top 10 things you need to know from this leadership conference, and her panel was the picture on the cover of that page. And then the next day she texted me and she said, oh my gosh, the CFOs of all these big companies are calling me. And so she went from just a small player in a big industry to a key thought leader who is showing the way for the industry for some really exciting new opportunities. So that's what good coaching can do, because someone from the outside who has a lot of experience can just see, just like, okay, yeah, that's the thing that's going to grab the attention. That's the thing that's going to make the difference. So get help. Don't be afraid. Great athletes, even with all their natural gifts, have coaches for a reason. Entrepreneurs, even great entrepreneurs with great gifts, need coaches too, to give them objective feedback and help them see past their own blind spots. We all do. So here's another thing that I am seeing. I am seeing a lot of former entrepreneurs who have become investors and then say, oh, I want to educate entrepreneurs, so I'll do boot camps or startups or whatever. And this applies also to accelerators who explicitly take an investment in the companies that they quote unquote mentor. Make sure that you have coaches, mentors, advisors who are not also investors. And this sounds a little strange, because when I was first raising money, I thought, oh, listen to the investors. They'll tell you what they want. They will tell you what they want, but they won't tell you how to negotiate the best deal for you and your team. Right? Why would they? They're going to negotiate with you. And investors have a mental model, which is, hey, you get what you negotiate, and it's up to the entrepreneur to learn how the game is played in order to have a good negotiation with me. But remember that they do this dozens and hundreds of times, and you do it a couple times in your life. So it's very important to have people who are completely not investor perspective, if you will, who have truly a pure 100% entrepreneur perspective as a coach or mentor. You can have people who become investors too, because I did, but you need somebody who really says, here's the inside track that nobody else is going to tell you. So make sure. So anyway, that's our 8 to 18 today, and I'll be back with some more later. Thanks.